All right, so welcome back to another midweek with Double Creek here at Double Creek Church of Christ. Right now we are in week 35 out of our 52 weeks with Jesus from the book by James Merritt. We're still in the fifth section of this book. This section of the book is called Jesus the Teacher. This section has 9 chapters in it, and we are in the 5th chapter of this section today. So after today, we will be more than halfway through section 5 of this book. This section, we've looked so far at a couple of Jesus' teachings, things he taught on. We've learned how we should judge as Christians, and then we spent 3 weeks learning how we should pray in the way that Jesus taught his disciples. Today we're going to shift to another one of Jesus' difficult teachings for many people. We could be on this subject for weeks, to be honest with you, if we really wanted to. The teaching we've looked at so far, they've come from a section in Matthew where Jesus was preaching and teaching on what we call the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, it was jam-packed with some of Jesus' greatest teachings, mainly because he was teaching in a way that they were not used to. He wasn't teaching to the ways that they held on to anyway. Because in his teachings, he was showing them really how they should be living, how they should have been living all along. And so today, we're going to see once again some teachings from Jesus from this Sermon on the Mount. The title of today's lesson is called The Treasure Principle. And it's one of the many teachings of Jesus that deal with money and finances. It comes also from the Sermon on the Mount. It comes from Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. So I want to start off today by reading those verses. Jesus said, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." So this is a teaching that Jesus gave that to the wealthy who were there, or to those who were hoarding or holding on to their money, it would have left them speechless. And really, it's also something I think that people today would and do struggle with. How do we manage our money? What does God want us to do with our money as individuals, as congregations, as the body of Christ worldwide? What does God want us to do with that money? You know, we know that God doesn't want us to just throw our money away on things that are meaningless. We understand that. But God also doesn't want us to just hold on to that money either, not using it. See, God wants us to be wise about how we use our money, our finances. And Jesus gives us some great advice, some great words here in this section that we just read. In our world, it's just easy to go into debt, isn't it? If you can't afford something, what do? We just pull out a credit card and we get it that way. Not saying we shouldn't or can't use a credit card at times. Credit cards can be very useful. But we also shouldn't use them just to buy everything we want, knowing that we can't pay it off. In a recent study that was done, a study showed that more than 64 million Americans carry credit card debt. It also showed that 340 million Americans are currently carrying some form of debt. 340 million. Debt. It's kind of just what is accepted in our world as normal for us, isn't it? Just look at our nation. Do you know what the national debt is today? As of today, the national debt is over $31.5 trillion. That's a debt that continues to climb. It's one that will not be paid off in our lifetime, if ever. So maybe we just see that as Americans, and maybe we just think that it's okay to overspend. Well, Merritt begins this chapter off by talking about final plans. And I want to read the first 3 paragraphs that he wrote talking about his own situation with his wife. He said this. He said, "I've been putting it off for a good while. Mainly, I just didn't want to deal with it. Recently, Teresa and I finally took the plunge. I thought it would be kind of miserable, but it was a ministry instead. When the results of our efforts arrived in the mail, I opened up the package and read the words on the front page: Last Will and Testament. The concept of the will dates back almost 5,000 years. In the past, the word will was used to specify real estate a person was leaving to others, while testament was used to identify the personal belongings that person wished to leave to loved ones and friends. Today, the world refers to anything, the word will today refers to anything that is left behind. We call it the last will and testament because we're not going to last. One day we will have eaten our last meal, read our last book, had our last kiss, spoken our last word. So we survey all that is ours, and we decide what to do with it. Yet when we take stock of everything that we call mine, we will discover, if we haven't already, that nothing is really ours. Those are some of the words that Merritt opens up this chapter talking about. There's some interesting words to think about. And maybe some of you who are hearing this have already had to think about life, your possessions, your wealth in this way. I've heard people say before, I've said it myself, about possessions that, hey, it's just stuff. I've said it about buildings and even church buildings in America, how we treat certain things and certain objects like they are so sacred and we can't move and we can't do anything with them. They can't be touched, they can't be replaced, but they're just stuff. They may have some sentimental value and meanings to people personally, but when things in our life or things in our churches start meaning more to us than growing God's church, growing God's kingdom, then we need to pay attention maybe to the words of Jesus here tonight that we're looking at. As Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I don't think anybody wants to see a church overspend. I don't think anybody wants to see a church be wasteful with its finances. You know, people in the church and the members of the church, the people who attend these churches and congregations, they give of their finances so they can be used to grow God's kingdom, right? So our responsibility is to use those finances to the best of our ability to share the gospel of Jesus Christ to all that we can. I read something recently that stuck with me. And to be honest with you, it was kind of a punch to the gut because I've seen it so many times. It was an article about small churches who have a lot of money. This is what I read. Maybe they had a building fund they've converted over into a savings account. And they hold on to those funds with clenched fists. And unfortunately, those clenched fists do more than hold on to the money. They also strangle the ministry of the church until it's no longer even a church. It's reduced to a small, wealthy club that provides services to its members. I said it's a punch to the gut because I've seen it. I've seen it in so many smaller churches over my lifetime over the years. And so whether it's fear, whether it's power, whether it's pride, whatever it is, you know, people give their money to the church so that it can be used to be a kingdom-oriented, a kingdom-growing church. And that article finished with this. This was also a punch. The article finished with, if you're in a small church with a large savings account that you're not using, you need to do something with that money. If you're not going to use it for kingdom work, than give it to a ministry that will. Our role as Christians is to share the gospel. Our mission is to go and make disciples, the Great Commission. But too many churches over the years have become exactly what this article talked about. A wealthy club that provides services to its members. And many churches have specialized in this. Now, I understand, like everyone else, that a church should definitely take care of its members. Absolutely. But the church has to also do whatever it takes to go and make disciples. That's our commission. So here at Double Creek, we've been trying to come up with different ways that we could reach people. People outside of these walls. We've done the drive-through, which brought a lot of people around. We have Trail Life going on here. Serving Sisters is starting up, which is taking things to people outside these walls who are in need. I think we're seeing some of the benefits of doing those things. Our youth group has been growing. We've had to spend some money doing those things, which that's the way it is. Some of you all in our church have secretly donated money here and there to the youth group. You know, it's wonderful to have people in a church who want to see that growth. Because if we don't grow, congregations all over, if we don't grow, then congregations eventually die off. So the question kind of becomes this: master or be mastered? Because that's what Jesus talks about here in this section today. How many times in the Bible, how many times do you think the Bible talks about money? Merritt points out the Bible, money is talked about in the Bible more than 800 times. And what do you think the percentage is of the teachings of Jesus? What do you think the percentage is in his teachings that he talked about money and finances? Merritt pointed out that in the teachings we have of Jesus, that it might surprise people that 15% of everything Jesus said had to do with money and finances. Why do you think Jesus and the Bible talk so much about money and finances and how to handle them? I think it's because Jesus knew then and even to today, and he understood just how difficult it would be for us to manage money. Because we see money as ours. We don't see our things as God's. And so one of two things is going to happen to everything that we think we own today. Everything that we see as ours. We're either going to lose it while we are alive, or we're going to leave it once we are dead. And so that's kind of what Jesus teaches here in this section that I read earlier that Merritt calls the treasure principle. The treasure principle isn't so much about how we give our money, it's about how we manage our money as individuals, as congregations, as the body of Christ worldwide. There's much more in the Bible when it comes to finances and money. There's much more about how to manage that than there is about giving it. Giving is important. We know that for Christians. It's expected. It's really required of us as Christians. But this principle that Jesus talks about is more about managing our money as individuals and congregations. It comes straight from the lips of Jesus. And it really boils down to this: you cannot manage your money until you master your money. We haven't done a good job of that as people in our society. That's why people like Dave Ramsey have become so popular in America. But if we can learn and understand how to apply the treasure principle to our lives, I think it would give everyone a greater deal of financial freedom and joy. So be strategic about where you put your wealth. We can put our wealth into a lot of different places, and we got a lot of options out there, don't we? Now, when Jesus was talking here about treasure in this section, his audience of that day, they knew and they understood exactly what Jesus would be talking about. See, wealthy, rich people during that day were not like us. You're considered wealthy and rich today if you have a nice, huge bank account, if you have large houses, if you have expensive cars, if you have the best of everything that you can think of. The people considered rich in those days wore the finest clothes. But what can happen to clothes? What did Jesus say could happen to treasures here in this section that are stored up or laid up? In the 19th verse, Jesus said, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal." Well, clothes, they can be destroyed by moths, can't they? Have you ever seen clothes that were destroyed by a moth? You let a moth get in your closet one time for a while. What are you going to find? You're going to find a lot of clothes that have holes in them, a lot of clothes that are ruined. Well, Jesus is telling these people here that holding on to all of these riches that you have will eventually bite you. So people were considered wealthy because of their clothes. But also they were considered wealthy if they had gold and silver. Now, where do most people store their money in today's world? Some people may have a safe at home or a secret place around the house where they put their money, but most people will place their money in a bank because it's a safe place, right? Safe location. It's all there together. But in the first century, they didn't have safes like we do today. They didn't have banks like we do today. So what did they do with their money? They just held on to it at their house. And what were houses made of then? They're not made like they are today, I can tell you that. They were typically made of clay and mud. So with that type of house, with that type of structure that they had, what type of protection do you think they had? You know, what type of protection do we use on our homes? What do people use to keep people from breaking into their homes today in our world? Many people have alarm systems. Some people just have the trusty revolver or pistol close by and close at hand in case someone breaks into their house. Obviously, they didn't have all these things back then. So Jesus reminds them, listen, you're holding on to all these riches. That's a place where eventually someone will break in and steal from you. He's reminding them once again that what we think is our treasure is not ours at all. So he tells us to store up for ourselves treasures in heaven instead. So we have to be wise in how we perceive our wealth. Because Jesus shifts immediately here in this section from being this financial counselor to what Merritt calls an ophthalmologist. What's an ophthalmologist? It's someone who specializes in eye care. Jesus says in verse 22, he says that the eye is the lamp of the body. Simply put, Jesus is saying here that the spiritual condition of your eye is determined by how your eyes see money. Jesus is not concerned with what we have. He's concerned with how we see what we have. Because how we see what we have will determine not only what we do with it, but also what it does to us. So be careful in how we position our wealth. You see, Jesus closes this section by emphasizing that we are either a master of our money or we are mastered by our money. Jesus said at the very end of this section, you cannot serve God and money. And I think in life, as individuals and churches, that we put so much emphasis on finances that our faith in God is often left out and lacking. Now, I don't think we should be foolish as individuals or churches with how we spend our money, our finances, but God warns us here, and not only here, in other places as well in the Scriptures, about holding on to our wealth. So does money control our decisions in life? Does money control our decisions in churches? Or does faith? If Jesus had said, you should not serve both God and money, Merritt says that would come down to a question of advisability. You shouldn't do that. If Jesus had said, you must not serve both God and money, Merritt points out that that would become a question of accountability. But Jesus didn't say those things, did he? Jesus said, you cannot serve both God and money, which makes it a matter of impossibility. We can't serve both. And so what Jesus is making clear here in this section is that we will never master our money until Jesus is the master of us. Our trust, our faith has to be in the fact that God is going to lead us in the right way. Jesus looked at his disciples, his closest followers, on more than one occasion and had to say these words, you of little faith. And I've often wondered here over the years, how many times would we hear that from Jesus as individuals, as churches in America? Or if letters were being written to churches in America, like what Jesus wrote to the churches in Revelation 2 and 3, or what the other letters written that Paul wrote and others wrote in the New Testament. If letters were being written to churches, what would Jesus say? What would Jesus say to us here at Double Creek Church of Christ? Would we get a stern warning about certain things? Because part of the role as individuals and as congregations is to look not only at what we do, but how we use what we have. It's that treasure principle about holding on to things. You know, you see TV shows called hoarders, where people just hold on to things, and it gets there and it's not used. God doesn't want us to be that type of person, those types of people as individuals or as churches. He wants us to use what we can to grow his kingdom. I hope you've enjoyed this tonight. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Stay safe and God bless.